Hi, good afternoon, everybody. This is Meredith Lego, and I'm doing a series of videos on Ascension science. The last few videos, I've focused a little bit more on sharing some personal experiences, but in the last video, or even the one before that, there was an interesting statement that was made, and basically it came from an ascended being who I am able to connect in with. But the concept of basically the heart is a portal, and by going within, we're able to achieve connections with all that is, essentially. And so I thought it would be fun to share a few more experiences or information that I was able to get through my connection with Ascended Master Hilarion on different concepts around and expanding upon that statement. Not that I asked him specifically about it, but it happened to come up in some other sessions, and that whole concept came up. So what I'm going to share is a question that I asked him, and this question actually was posed by a friend of mine who wanted to know some information, but it does connect to the concept of the heart and the significance of going within the heart. So her question was to explain the phrase, God is the ocean, our spirit is a wave, and our soul is a drop of water. So she wanted to know more about that particular phrase, and then also was curious about the particular difference between our soul and our higher self. So the answer that I got from Ascended Master Hilarion was the source field is an expanse of all that is, was, and will be in the construct. So with that first statement, he gets into some teachings that were actually originally unpacked in the very first series of videos that I did around the concept of the quantum field, the source field, and how electrons actually sort of interact with consciousness, or quantum particle interacts with consciousness. And so I highly, highly, highly encourage that if you're new to this channel, you actually go back to the beginning, because a lot of the concepts, as I keep saying, really builds upon each other. And all these concepts around the construct, that word, the construct, are actually brought up in the 1.0 series of the video series, and I've tried to order them that way around sort of groupings of themes. So I'll read that statement again. So the source field is an expanse of all that is, was, and will be in the construct. In essence, it's the continuous energy field or ocean of energy. A fractal of the energy breaks to know itself in an aspect of the creator called the oversoul. This oversoul then fractalizes into multiple individual manifestations or souls. The energy continues to split, but like a fractal, contains the essence of the original source or seed code. Another analogy is a large bed sheet. Imagine a hand pushing up through the bed sheet, not breaking the material, but simply lifting up. You can see the outline of the hand, and yet it's still showing as part of the whole bed sheet. Likewise, the hand can spread its fingers out to show individual manifestations of the hand. Again, they are still part of the same bed sheet. So I think that was sort of a great example. So he set up the concept that essentially you've got energy and consciousness that has essentially fractalized, if you will, into more unit or individual manifestations. And we'll have to understand more of kind of why that happened. But he did reference the concept of the oversoul. And I want to parking lot that concept, because there's more that I want to share on that later on that doesn't necessarily come from Hilarion, but does come from other teachers I've learned from. I also love the concept of essentially the bed sheet, because if you can't imagine, you have a sheet and you kind of pop your hand up, you're still gonna, even though there's this like one sheet, or you have multiple hands or even multiple fingers, they're all still part of the same sheet. So that's essentially the analogy that he's using in this particular case. And so if you go back to the original question, God is the ocean, our spirit is the wave, and a soul is a drop of water. We're all really part of one massive energy field, having sort of unique experiences. He goes on to say that the fractalizing allows for multiple experiences through which to learn. Multiple souls are part of the oversoul. The time has come for many to be infused with love in their hearts. The higher self is the portal or the gateway to evolution of consciousness. A great change is ahead as new species and interactions occur. The old ways will be renewed in the memory of man, and I also believe he means, mankind, so women, humans. So the old ways will be renewed in the memories of man, and a great rising up or awakening is set to happen. The memories of who you are and the technology available for the evolution of consciousness. Use the gifts of your skill to be a channel for messages. Keep an open heart and follow the flow of energy. The subtle impulses will guide you to the awakening and the path of perfection. The soul is the vehicle, and the higher self is the portal or gateway to evolution of consciousness. The higher self is the portal within you for the connection to source. It's the intermediary, if you will, or the halfway point. The portal technology is available by going within, into your heart center and folding in. The higher realms of consciousness are already before you now. So there was a couple of interesting statements that I kind of just quickly read. The first was, hold on, my screen just lost my place. Let me go back to it. The first was a paragraph in which it kind of was out of context, but sometimes I'll get these statements coming in. A great change is ahead as new species and interactions occur. The old ways will be renewed in the memories of man as a great rising up or awakening is set to happen. So that first statement was kind of interesting because he basically is stating that there's going to be new species or interactions occurring. I don't know entirely what was meant. I didn't necessarily probe that question, but in other sessions that I did with him, he definitely does get into the fact that humanity is going to start sort of interacting with other beings that aren't necessarily human. I think it's going to take the open heart of a lot of individuals as this starts to happen. This probably leads into the whole concept of the disclosure movement, but I also feel like it's essentially, if we're in a holographic reality and this is a test, this is probably also the awakening of within sort of our DNA of certain codes or genes about sort of remembering more of who we are. And so essentially he says the old ways will be renewed in the memories of man, and a great rising up and awakening is set to happen. Which to me, the way that I interpreted that, and you can interpret it entirely different, something that's unique that resonates within you, but the way that I interpreted it is that old ways, perhaps ways that we used to operate in the past in terms of, I don't know if it's technologies or connections to source, maybe just, the way that we used to operate as a species is possibly going to kind of come back to us. So I do understand that there was sort of a disconnection that was created, and much of it was actually through manipulation and control of sort of connecting humanity from a source, from our consciousness source. And so essentially, as we start to awaken about what's happened to humanity and other species, as we're starting to interact with other species, this is essentially going to cause us to remember much of our history that's been lost, and likely will cause us to go back to old ways of how we used to operate as a species. So he says that the memories of who you are and the technology available for the evolution of consciousness. So that there was not necessarily a verb with that statement, and it could be that when I was writing it down, I missed it. But essentially, the memories of who you are, at the core of who we are, we are, source beings. We are powerful divine beings. We we have the technology within us to do incredible things. And I shared some interesting things, that I've experienced and will continue to share more in future videos. But, he's basically saying, start to tap into those gifts and remember, what it is that you have the ability to do as a fully conscious being. Keep an open heart and follow the flow of energy. So he goes on and starts to give that definition a little bit more. The soul is the vehicle, and the higher self is a portal or gateway to the evolution of consciousness. I thought that was pretty interesting. I'm sure that, there's others who might have different definitions, and in fact, I know they are, but I'm just sharing what I particularly got from Hilarion. So again, I encourage you to, work with what resonates for you. And if this isn't it, that's great. It's just another perspective or point of view, right? The higher self is the portal within you for the connection to source. It's the intermediary or the halfway point. The portal technology is available by going within into your heart center and folding in. So again, he keeps referencing this terms of technology, and technology is not necessarily, what we're buying off the shelves for our computers and for our laptops and phones to create connections. We can connect simply by going within and leveraging the technology that we have, within our own DNA codes, because it's when we start to tune in, go into our heart center, we start to tune in more into our DNA, and it's through that the raw seed codes, exists for tapping into connections with all beings, as well as time and space. And like I said in the last video, I shared an example of having traveled through like a time portal, but I essentially was going within and tuning into it. So everybody has the ability. Everybody watching this video has that ability. You just have to want to do it and do the inner work in order to clear any energetic blockages that exists within any of your 4 bodies. And I think I talked about that a couple of videos ago when I got into clearing emotional energies or traumas. So that's really the answer that he provided to that question. But I did want to reference something that he did bring up around the concept of the oversoul. And there are obviously lots of different points of view about what are called different sort of stations of identity within kind of the multiple body types that we have. And, obviously, I've in many of the videos, if you have listened to them, have talked about the concept that we've got a physical body, an emotional body, a mental body, and an energetic or kind of etheric body. And they are all just pure energy. Obviously, we've got mass, so we sense that there's mass, but it's actually pure energy. And then there's also other sort of layers that start to go up when it comes relative to consciousness growth. And so we are in a certain dimension, and we're experiencing sort of this density that's associated with the physical self. So this would be sort of like the this harmonic universe that we're in, the first one. It's a certain density, and it's associated with the first through third dimensions. Then when you start to shift into dimensions 4 through 6, you start to connect more into your soul aspect. As you move into dimensions 7 through 9, you connect more into the oversoul aspect. So this is when the different sort of fractals, if you will, of consciousness that's currently fractalized out, having different experiences through individual human bodies or beings, whatever form they may take. You start to actually tune in to the oversoul aspect of it, and you can start to, tune into more of those different aspects of the individual fractal manifestations that are having different experiences. And that's likely what I have been starting to experience as I've been remembering quote unquote past lives. That it could be that I'm tapping into, again, because we're all one. It's not necessarily my past life, as a soul. Maybe it is, jury's out until like I move on and get the bigger picture. But what Hilarion was suggesting in another video that I shared with you is that essentially I'm tapping into a sort of experience that happened within the collective sort of consciousness. So that could be sort of maybe I'm connected, through the oversoul, and like, well, I'm over here, I'm experiencing another life as part of that oversoul over here. And because there's no time, what I'm seeing happens to be in the past. As I mentioned before, I've also experienced a non-human life, and I've tapped into that life several times, out of the blue, of a being that happens to be a centaur, which is pretty interesting. So when we kind of are able then to tune into sort of the oversoul aspect, dimensions 10 through 12, you're starting to tap into what's called the Christos avatar aspect. So not like don't take it from the religious figure Christ, but it's Christos, which maybe I'll share another video on this, actually starts to reference Kristalla energy and consciousness. But it basically is unity consciousness in full. You feel it, you are it. And then dimensions 13 through 15 is the Rishi aspect. So I didn't necessarily learn about all of those different stations of identity for like the different multidimensional bodies of consciousness that we have through Hilarion, but I've been studying it and thought I'd share it in relationship to that one question that I got. So if you're more interested in learning about those, I would recommend perhaps that you just look up the concept of stations of identity, and perhaps in your search reference the concept of the oversoul or the avatar or the Rishi, because that'll help you specifically find a search relative to that definition of station of identity. The last part that I actually wanted to bring up is, relative to that question. When I was providing answers back to my friend about this question, I also wanted to share with her, and I'll share with you, different sort of answers to the question about sort of the higher self and the soul. And this is provided by an individual I know named Solitaire Park. And Solitaire Park has written several books. And the last one that I'm referencing some information on is called Patterns of Existence. So I'm going to kind of show it here. So it's called Patterns of Existence. And Solitaire's had, a lot of interesting experiences of being able to explore and sort of map out what the astral plane, as well as what he refers to as the altered states of reality. In some aspects, he's using probably similar terms as dimensions or densities, but he just is using different terminology. But one of the things that he writes in his book is that the soul exists in dimensions he calls the altered states of reality, and the spirit exists, the spirit body exists in the astral plane. And in this write-up that I did for my friend, I said, interestingly enough, a parallel is in the theosophical teachings, is that a soul exists in what we call devachan, which means it's causal body, and the spirit is in the astral plane also, which means it's the emotional body. The spirit body is energy without matter and is dependent upon ether, and the soul body is energy without matter and is dependent upon ozone. And both bodies operate or move at drastically different speeds. And in fact, within this book, he actually gets into the different speeds that these particular energy bodies move in terms of measurement of speed of light. And Solitaire's background is in theoretic physics, I believe it is. So he's got more of an engineering sort of background as he's going into this information. But if you're interested in understanding more about sort of the geometries, layout of different like gates and portals, how that plays into the different sort of body types that, you know, I've been talking about, I would encourage you to read his last book, as well as the other ones that sort of talk about the concept of the astral plane and the altered states of reality. So with that, the only other thing that I can share is that I can attest to the fact that when I've experienced going out of body, or my consciousness has gone out of body, you know, this is the kind of situation where your consciousness is out of body and you're looking around and you see your physical body there, and then you say, okay, I'm going to go places. I've had that experience of being able to think about, let's say, a destination and immediately be there within like no time. So I can attest the fact that your consciousness really can move, or that whatever body I'm in, you know, whether it's the soul or the spirit, I'm not really sure. I'm sure he can tell me, but it's going at lightning speed in that particular moment. So the speed level between the physical body, like the spirit and the soul, do in fact operate at much different speeds. So that's maybe a look at it from more of a physics standpoint. But again, I encourage you to read that book to learn more, way in some cases over my head. So with that, I hope that you were able to take away something, you know, about sort of the connection of how it all fits within one, you know, massive quantum field, and, you know, addressing some differences between the soul, the higher self, and obviously all these different stations of identity. And so with that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, wherever you are. And I will tune in the next video. Take care. Bye.